Thanks for the introduction. I'm an architect and urbanist, as was said. Can you understand me, by the way? That's better? Okay. So again, welcome. My name is Stefan Bendix. I'm an architect and urban planner. So what I do in my daily life is designing public spaces like that. That's an example from a project we did in Brussels. So I'm not actually designing cycle infrastructure. I design public space where the bicycle is quite often a part of it. And that's, I think, an important difference. So I'm not kind of focused on the bike as itself. I'm focused on making cities better places, and the bike can play a vital role in that. So by accident, that's one of the projects I did recently. There was actually a kind of cargo bike, and I can tell you that's in Brussels. There are not many of those cargo bikes in Brussels. So I have a project that at least was crossed by a cargo bike once. I'm an architect, but I kind of got into cycling, and I'm an expert considered now in cycling in relation to the city. So whenever I talk to cycling in-crowd people and many NGOs, I like to show this stuff. That's my bike. And it's a really brilliant bike, I think. It's actually a bike I didn't buy. It's a bike a trainee in our office left behind when she went back to Italy. Everything is already broken off what can break off. There's no bell, no light, there's no gear things. There's one gear. It's a perfect mix between acceleration and keep on cycling. The lock is more expensive than the rest of the bike. The only thing I did to it is I put a Brooks saddle on it that I had from a student bike, and it's ever since the perfect tool for me to move around in Rotterdam. It's what I use it for. Nobody steals it. It's perfect. So when I talk to mainly people from the American context, are there Americans here? American cycle advocates? I really like to show them this picture because that's my car. Right? It's a Russian car, it's a Lada Niva. And I'm a car driver as well, so I'm not only a cyclist. I'm cycling in the city because it makes sense. But that's, it was mentioned, I live in Belgium. I have a little house in the woods. I make wood to heat my house. And that's the thing I need to get the wood from the wood into the house. And it's perfect for that. It's small, it's compact, it's four-wheel drive, there's mud tires. It's the perfect tool to move around in the woods. So it's not about the car is bad and the bike is good. It's really about what is the right means of transport in the right condition. And that's the perfect thing for in the woods. Now when I did some image research this morning, I came across that, what would I say? I mean, I cannot use a cargo bike to get the wood out of the wood, but actually I can because I found this one. I think that's a brilliant cargo bike, and I might reconsider and use a bicycle to get the wood at home. Isn't it great? I mean, the kind of center point of gravity is just above the back. It's maybe not, it's a bit high, it should be lower, but could do that with my bike. And actually I would like to show you this because this is the closest I got to designing a cargo bike. We did we called it the flip over bike. We made a movable platform for the opening of a pedestrianized area in Brussels, and we designed a kind of mix between a bicycle carriage and the flip over board where you can show some information. And we did that last year. That's some of the books I wrote and articles about cycling. When I talked to a lot of experts, I'm a lot of these kind of conferences, and once a colleague of mine used this quote. I'm not sure if it's really from a Belgian politician. That would be the most bright Belgian politician I ever met. But she or he said, sometimes the car is an excellent alternative to the bicycle. That's a good quote, no? Sometimes. Mostly not, but sometimes it might just be that the car is actually a good alternative. What I would like to discuss a bit today is, could we extend that to the cargo bike? Right? Maybe the truck sometimes is a quite good alternative to the cargo bike. It's a bit more challenging because moving goods is more complex than driving a car, and you have a larger amount of things you can move in a truck than on a bike. But I mean, what would it be like if moving goods around, at least in the city, the standard would be cargo bikes and not trucks and all kind of other things we have. And then the question is, would that lead to a kind of different kind of city? Because as we all know, you're very aware of that here, I guess, that the car kind of rather radically changed our cities. I know if you know these publications, urban planners like me, they know this. This is a book, a German book. I was already introduced as being German. A German guy who wrote the book, Die autogerechte Stadt. That means the city that suits the car. And that's what people did. Colleagues of mine of an earlier generation, they shaped the city according to the needs of the car. And in some way, we all know what this resulted in. The cities are made for cars, so they attract more cars, and it's a kind of self-fulfilling prophecy. And it quite often fucked up the city, let's be honest, as we know it, that this kind of dominant mode of transport was applied so consequently, it was a German consequence, onto the city. Now this little imagine, what would it be like if we make the car suitable for the cargo bike, or the bike in general? I mean, this is a cargo bike conference, I kind of tweak it to the cargo bike, but would that result in a different kind of city? Would that be necessary? I mean, would the cargo bike, like the car did, really demand on changing the city? Or is the cargo bike more flexible, more easygoing, so it would not actually need a different kind of city? I think that's a very interesting question. And I tell you right away, I don't have the answer to that. I'm more here to ask some questions than giving proper answers. And to approach this kind of thought, what would the city be like if really based on cycling or cargo bikes? I would like to make a little step back in history and actually follow this idea of like mobility and logistics always shaped our cities. I mean, that's my kind of background as an urban planner. Cities and our public spaces were always depending on the way we move around. That's already starting with the question, where do we build our cities? It's a map from Germany in the Middle Ages. So cities were built where two roads meet each other, or where a road crosses a river. That's already the location of the city was defined by logistics and mobility. Not only the place, not only where we built our cities, but also the way we built them. It started with street villages. So we built our villages around streets. This is a situation, the street was just a bit widened, so public space happens. A square, maybe a market, whatever. So not only the position, also the shape of our cities is decided by the way we move through the cities, the mobility, the logistics. We're in Holland, so I want to show you this. The Grachtengordel is one of the most picturesque pieces of urbanism in the world, maybe. It's a purely functional design based on the needs of the people who had their warehouses there. They wanted to move goods in through the water and then unload them in an efficient way to their warehouses, do some to them and ship them off again. So this very beautiful, picturesque city is actually purely based on logistics. You can say like that's all stuff from the past, but it still is. Still logistics and mobility shape our cities, but unfortunately quite often they shape it in a not so positive way. So, I mean, you can see some aesthetic beauty in this photograph, but it's not a nice city, right? That's Los Angeles. I was living in Los Angeles for some years. Well, it's impressive, but it's not the way we want to build our cities, I guess. But it's based by, in this case, car mobility. And also the architecture is shaped by it, the way we move goods around. This is a huge distribution center of the biggest Dutch food distributor, Albert Heijn. That's the kind of architecture, buildings, work environments that derive from this kind of logistics system we invented. Right? I think I don't need to mention that I either don't like this as a city or as a kind of place to work or to live. And if you zoom in even a bit more, you could see that even on the micro scale, the way we deliver goods to the shops still has impact on how we can use or not use at certain times the public space. When we design public spaces in shopping areas, it's always a huge issue. How do you deal with the logistics? Where do the trucks unload? At what time do they unload? It's a huge problem. It has a huge impact on public space, right? To that point that there's a lot of opposition. So whenever you want to implement something, the shop owners, they want to have a huge loading dock for the big truck in front of their door. But the inhabitants of the neighborhood, they resist to that. So there's a huge resistance, and now we don't want those areas dedicated for deliveries in or nearby where we live. So you could say the cargo bike is a part of the solution to that, because you don't need big loading docks for that. You need some distribution centers that maybe they are small scale, they can be integrated in the urban fabric. Some examples, probably you guys know much more of those things, but I found that always very inspiring. That's a company from Canada who proposes to move stuff around when you change house. Yeah, that can be more or less on any street. You can stop in front of the house. Is that a kind of clever way to move goods around, and what does it mean for the city? And there's actually some reasons, and again, I guess you guys know more about that than me. The cargo bike plays in on some important trends, right? There's a technical innovation. I mean, just look around here. These e-bikes, e-cargo bikes. I saw very ingenious things about how to move a pallet on a trailer and lifting it up. I mean, there's a lot of innovation at the moment going on. So there's a huge momentum, I think. There's also changed logistics. We all, not all, I hope, but some of us do probably. They order stuff on the internet all the time, right? You don't have huge deliveries to make, but there's once in a while, every twice, 3 times a week, there's coming a little van, stopping in front of your door, bringing you a book or bringing you a t-shirt and drives away. So there's a huge kind of change in how logistics work. The packages get smaller, but the frequency increases. There's a kind of local thinking that's more positive tendency maybe. So people really are interested in having goods maybe from shorter distances, all these kind of biological vegetable boxes you can order now, right? You don't get them from China or from Italy or from Spain. You get them from a proximity that is actually doable by bike. So there's a whole kind of thing, and in general, we are much more concerned about impact on the environment, and there's also a huge demand growing in the quality of our living spaces. So all those kind of trends are, I think, in favor of the cargo bike. So it could become actually a really success formula to switch logistics much more to this bicycle. And an interesting question is that I ask myself for cycling, but also in relation to cargo bikes, like this success might not only lead to positive things, right? There is already tendencies, at least in Holland, that the growth of cycling is becoming a problem. And in terms of cargo bikes, one of the aspects is that they are rather big, right? So on a cycle path, they take up a lot of space. The cycle paths get more and more busy because we cycle more and more, at least in urban areas. So it could be actually at one moment a huge problem, and I think in Copenhagen it is. I met yesterday the director of the Danish Cycling Association, and yes, when you have 1 or 2 cargo bike percentage increasing, I mean, it's 3 or 4 times the amount of congestion. So when they build a cycle path that's just wide enough, and you get 5% more cargo bikes, and in Copenhagen they do, because all the young families have cargo bikes there, it's filled up right away. So you need to think about enlarging it again. So it can also become a problem that this diversity of different bikes appears. And different speeds is another thing, right? Cargo bikes are maybe slower, they maybe turn less easily, so it's a problem on the micro scale on how to design the infrastructure for it. Another thing is simply the congestion. This is a picture of Utrecht. So there are actually now bicycle traffic jams. I don't see so much cargo bikes in there, but if you make the parallel to a car highway, you have a lot of congestion. And you have the normal bikes and the cargo bikes. Maybe you should separate them in 2 rows. So what should happen? This, by the way, this picture shows a very specific situation, because the guys in the background on the other side of the road, you see them? They're actually policemen. So they control once in a year, they control on the traffic lights that cyclists respect the red light. And the picture is taken on this one specific morning in September 2014, I think. And that's when this bicycle traffic jam happened. On a normal day, when the cyclist just rides through, there's no traffic jam. that leads to another thing, like, do we need to organize traffic so well, or is it actually quite good that cyclists are a bit anarchistic, they don't care so much about respecting the rules? But the tendency is the opposite. We want to have cyclists behave like car drivers more and more. Yeah, by the way, one of the bicycle civil servants in Utrecht told me that actually when they calculate, they model those crossings, they calculate a certain amount of cyclists that disobeys the rules. So even the administration, they take that into account. So they know actually that when everybody respects the rules, the system doesn't work anymore, and they calculate on it. That's, I think, a very interesting. That can only happen in Holland, I think, by the way. Unthinkable in Germany. But I was talking about the problems of increasing cycling and increasing cargo biking as well. Another thing is the parking situation. Probably some of you came in through Utrecht, or you know Utrecht because you live in Holland anyhow. Well, the public space around Central Station Utrecht is really, really fucked up by the amount of parked bikes. So there's resistance to it. People start to hate bikes because they are parked everywhere. Something to think about as well, in cargo bikes, they take up even more space, and it's even more difficult to just drop them somewhere. So there are now specific cargo bike parking spots at the Amsterdam Central Station, where you're only allowed to put your cargo bike, because they don't fit into those structures, but then normal guys also put their bike there. So authorities have to think about, then we have to take away the bikes that are not cargo bikes from those zones, because it's getting very, very complex. It's a huge question how to deal with parked bikes in urbanism. And another thing is that actually logistics is very, very complex, right? If you want to think about changing logistics, how we move goods through the city, it's not only depending on the city making cycle paths or parking facilities. You have to deal with a lot of partners, with the shop owners to start with. So changing logistics to more bicycle-related forms is you have to really think in a system. It's not just doing one thing, you need to think in a whole complex combination of things. You have to talk with a lot of people. Yeah? The city, the shop owners, the inhabitants, the guys who distribute stuff, the Albert Heijns of this world. You need a long-term vision. It's something you don't do in 3 or 4 years. So you have to actually think about the next mayor might also have to support this strategy. It's very, very complex. And you have to have a consistent urban planning and traffic planning strategy for the city. At ARCAM, that's the Architecture Institute of Amsterdam, we worked in a kind of FIETS-Lab session with a number of experts on that subject. Rob van den Bijl was part of it, but I think he's already gone. He was here this morning. He knows all about that, so if you want to talk about it to him, he knows all about logistics. And we discussed how could that be implemented in Amsterdam. That's an example from Paris, by the way, where you combine transport on water with transport on bikes. You might know that. I thought it's very interesting also for Amsterdam, for example. And we thought together with the municipality about how would you organize, would you define zones in the city where a certain mode of transport is preferred. So the inner city is actually dedicated to, more to cargo bike delivery. And then you would need to think about those kind of logistic centers where you change from trucks to bikes, for example. But that shows a bit the complexity of the thing. You need to really think in the whole chain of stakeholders, from the shop owner to the guys who produce the goods and deliver them. It's a very, very complex thing. And I'm not sure that even Amsterdam, as being one of the most sophisticated cycle cities in the world, will manage to do that. Even Amsterdam really has a hard time to start implementing those kind of ideas to change logistics in the city. So I think it's very important when you talk about traffic projects and also cycle infrastructure, in the first point is a traffic project. It shouldn't be only a traffic project, it should be a project for the city. So you should think about making traffic projects, urban projects. That sounds maybe a bit abstract. This is the best I could find to explain to you what I mean. This is the city of Vienna, the ring road of Vienna, where there was the demand for building new infrastructure. It was 1880, 1819. The tram system just came up, so there was need for space for this new mobility, the tram that entered the city. And they found space on the old fortifications that were not necessary anymore. And they did not only build an efficient way of roads and tramways and space for still horses at that time and carriages, but they also built all kind of public spaces. So when you go to Vienna, the musea are along this road, the parks, the city hall, the opera. They built, at the same time they built the infrastructure, they created a new kind of vital, attractive, important part of the city. Now that's something in some way we lost a bit. Now we build infrastructure, and maybe I don't want to rebuild cities, but this combination of making an urban project out of a traffic project, that's something me as an urbanist I found very interesting and very important. Now when we talk about logistics and cycle paths, I have to admit, I think we don't really exactly know what to design for. This is a huge change still going on. I mean, this technical innovation is amazing, I think. The cycle passes are developing a lot, this new kind of cycle superhighway typology that emerged. We are kind of experimenting, I think. We are very at the beginning of how the mobility of the future will look like. Actually, I think we don't have a clue how we will move around in the city in 20 years. I just have the hunch or the hope that the bike will play an important role in it. But what I'm a bit more sure about, I think we know a bit what we don't want. That's already something. Right? And what we don't want to design for is, I guess, this. Right? That's the city as we know it. It's public space taken up by cars, by traffic, and by, to a huge extent, also the logistics of the city. Yeah? So I have an office in Brussels now. This is where I walk through every day. I tell you, it's not pleasant. I know, do we have people from Brussels here? Oh, yeah. You agree with me? It's not a nice place to move around, neither by foot nor by bicycle, and even by car it sucks. That's what we don't want. As a designer, I work quite often on those situations, and that's an example of a project recently work on in Brussels. That's a square, a bit on the outskirts of Brussels, Dumontplein, and that's what it looked like until today. We just had it handed in a building permit last week. It's a nice public square. It has a tram. It has a bit of green. There's a market on it. There's a kermesse, and at the moment it's only used as a car park. Right? The old inner side is used for parking cars, and the road is so wide that any truck can just stop at any time and unload and load. That means congestion, and the tram is blocked, and then the cars they start to toot toot toot. So it's this whole kind of it's a space designed for traffic, but it still doesn't work. It's not nice. What we propose is this. So we don't know, and it's really a problem. We don't know how this space exactly will function in the future. How in 20 years you will move around. But we know what we don't want to. We don't want to cement this kind of position that the car and the trucks have now. So we diminished the driveway. We made the inner part of the square car free, and we actually did on purpose not solve completely the logistic problem. No? So again, a picture of what it is now, and that's a picture of how this space should look in the future. So we really made large sidewalks. We didn't build particular cycle infrastructure. It's a more kind of shared space concept, but we proposed a kind of zoning of an area that's those lightly, this area in a more light pavement, where the bikes could pass rather than the pedestrians. So we organized it in a halfway, right? Not define things, a cycle path, a footpath, and a place for trucks, and a place for taxis, a place for trams, and we combined all the car traffic on the tram line. We hope that you do a design for not 10 years or 5 years, but for 30, 40 years maybe, that this will be resilient enough and flexible enough to adapt to a new kind of also a way the shops are serviced. Because we don't know. But I think it's not designed for, but it would work very well with cargo bikes serving the space. But it's not a design for that. That's something more practice. Now, I have the opportunity to give you some thoughts on the go. I want to give you some things that really are in my mind that I'm dealing with, and I would like to share them with you. First, I think it's really important that when we design cycle infrastructure, or any infrastructure, we think about the whole, not only about the infrastructure. And that goes as well for cargo bikes. Yeah? Also, the biggest bikes might not need to have a very specific infrastructure. If you design it for it, think about the city as a whole. Another one of those arguments is that the cycling is not only a mode of transport, it's a social activity, and that's the fun of it. That's why cycling is so great. And a lot of engineers and myself are sometimes in the kind of temptation to organize cycling so well and make it efficient and deal with it in a very kind of mathematical way almost, that we forget that at the basis cycling is something very simple and it's fun. It's fun to cycle, it's fun to meet other people, to interact. You might not have to solve everything. And the cargo bike is great, of course, to put your kids in and to drive them around. That's the style. You kind of start with the fun, not cycling yourself, but in the box of a Buckfiets. And the last ones, and it seems like obvious. I mean, I'm thinking, you might think, why do I tell you this? But bikes aren't cars, right? And even cargo bikes are not cars. But we kind of have the tendency to deal with them like if they would be just a little bit smaller cars. We make left turn lanes for bikes now in Amsterdam. So when you approach Central Station Amsterdam, there is a huge congestion problem, but we make left turn lanes, right turn lanes. In Rotterdam, we design push button stoplights. So when you come to a stoplight, you have to stop, you push a button, the light turns green, you can cycle on. That sounds in the first way as a very smart thing to do, because then you can get green light on demand and you can go on, but you always have to stop. Right? A car doesn't care if you stop. You just hit the pedal and you go on. But a cyclist has to slow down, has to put a foot down, has to put this button, and then he has to accelerate again. So there are many, many ideas with all the best intentions that we design for the bike, but they don't really take care of the bike not being a car. I think we need to really return to the basics of cycling, and I think sometimes it's just much more simple than we think. And overdoing the design for cycle infrastructure might be actually contradictory. So let's watch out that we keep cycling fun, and that's the message I would like you to give home. Thank you very much.
Okay, Stefan, thank you very much. Since we have another 5 minutes,